It began with laughter. Cruel, sharp, and echoing against the iron gates of a mansion that seemed too proud to be touched by dust or time. A gleaming luxury car sat stranded at the edge of the driveway, hood open like a defeated soldier bowing its head. The wealthy woman who owned it stood nearby, her designer heels sinking slightly into the gravel. She glanced at her diamond-encrusted watch, tapping it with irritation, as though time itself was offending her. Her eyes shifted down, locking on the man who had come to help. He wore a faded jumpsuit, stained with years of grease and hard labor. His hands were bare, roughened by work, scarred by effort. He didn't carry a shining toolbox or polished instruments. Just himself. Just his hands. She let out a laugh that cut like glass. You don't even have proper tools," she scoffed, her voice dripping with disbelief. The mechanic, a black man whose face carried both calm and quiet strength, did not flinch. He didn't argue. He simply leaned closer to the engine, listening, studying, touching it like a doctor reading a heartbeat. Her laughter grew louder, crueler. Friends lingered near the gates, whispering, exchanging looks that burned with judgment. The air was heavy with the kind of silence that follows mockery, the silence of onlookers waiting to see humiliation complete its course. But his eyes never wavered. He wasn't looking at her, nor at them, only at the broken machine before him. A man stripped of respect, yet filled with a dignity that could not be mocked away. And so the question hung in the air like smoke. Could bare hands, hardened by labor, prove their worth against diamonds and derision? The woman folded her arms across her chest, smirking as he worked. "This is rich," she muttered to her companions. "Imagine calling a mechanic who shows up empty-handed. What's next? He'll pray the car starts." Laughter erupted from the crowd. The mechanic wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, still silent. His focus was razor-sharp. Every wire, every bolt, every beat of the stalled engine seemed to speak to him. The wealthy woman leaned in closer, her perfume strong, her disdain stronger. "Go on then. Show us what miracles those dirty hands can do." The more he worked, the harsher her words became. She taunted him, turning his silence into fuel for her mockery. The friends at her side chuckled, recording with their phones, eager to capture the downfall of a man they assumed was beneath them. The scene felt like theater, the mechanic cast as the fool, the woman as the queen of ridicule. And yet, every insult she threw seemed to bounce off him like rain against stone. Minutes stretched like hours. The wealthy woman sighed dramatically, tapping her heel against the ground. "This is pathetic," she muttered loud enough for all to hear. "He doesn't even know what he's doing. Probably just pretending." But as she spoke, the mechanic's hands moved with quiet certainty. He tightened a loose connection, adjusted a worn belt, and leaned closer to listen to the rhythm of the machine. His silence was unsettling, his composure almost unnatural in the face of so much ridicule. For the first time, a trace of unease flickered across the woman's face. Then it happened. A sudden spark, a cough from the engine, and then a roar. The luxury car came alive beneath his hands, its powerful hum filling the air like a lion breaking free of its cage. The crowd gasped. The wealthy woman's laughter froze on her lips, turning into stunned silence. The mechanic stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his jumpsuit. He looked at her then, not with anger, not with triumph, but with calm eyes that carried the weight of quiet justice. But the true twist was still to come. From the mansion, a small voice called out. A boy ran toward them, his steps uneven but determined. "Mom!" he shouted, his eyes wide with recognition. He pointed at the mechanic with joy lighting his face. "That's him. That's the man who fixed my wheelchair last year. He wouldn't even take money." The crowd fell silent. The woman's face drained of color. Her diamond-clad hands trembled as her son clung to the mechanic's leg, looking up at him with pure admiration. The wealthy woman staggered back a step, her laughter now hollow in the air. This wasn't just a mechanic. This was the man who had given her child freedom, who had restored dignity to her own family without asking for anything in return. And she had mocked him. She had humiliated him. Her eyes filled with tears as the weight of her cruelty crashed down on her. She took a hesitant step forward, her voice breaking. I didn't know," she whispered, her arrogance dissolving into shame. The mechanic placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, giving him a small smile. He said nothing, his silence more powerful than any rebuke. The wealthy woman's friends looked away, ashamed, their earlier laughter replaced by guilt. She dropped her arms, no longer crossing them in pride, but letting them fall in surrender. "I laughed at the man who gave my son back his freedom," she whispered, the words barely audible but heavy with truth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, streaking her perfect makeup. The boy hugged the mechanic tighter, his small voice carrying more strength than hers. "Thank you," he said, simply, sincerely. The crowd, once entertained by mockery, now bowed their heads in quiet respect. What they had witnessed was not just a car being fixed. It was dignity standing tall against pride. It was humility defeating arrogance. It was the truth that diamonds and wealth could never outshine the strength of hands that serve, hands that heal, hands that build. The wealthy woman wept openly now, her sobs breaking the silence. She reached for the mechanic's hand, trembling. "I was wrong," she admitted. "So terribly wrong." But the mechanic didn't respond with bitterness. He didn't lecture her or bask in her regret. He simply nodded, his eyes soft but firm, as though to say, "The lesson is yours to carry." The luxury car purred behind them, alive again, but its sound was nothing compared to the heartbeat of the moment. The mechanic, mocked and belittled, had not only restored a machine but revealed a truth. The wealthy woman's transformation was complete. Her pride had shattered. Her laughter had turned to tears. And in the stillness that followed, the story gave its final gift, a moral that echoed far beyond the mansion gates. Never underestimate those who work with their hands. Never judge worth by wealth, or dignity by status. Because sometimes, the ones mocked for their scars are the very ones who carry the power to change lives. That day, a wealthy woman learned that humility is richer than diamonds. And a crowd that once laughed walked away in silence, their hearts heavy with a truth they would never forget. The laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew sharper. The wealthy woman stood taller now, as though the power of her audience made her voice louder. Her friends leaned against the iron gates, sipping champagne, smirks carved into their faces. They weren't just watching a mechanic at work, they were watching a performance. And in their eyes, he was the fool, the spectacle, the man they believed should know his place. "Look at him," the woman sneered, gesturing with a jeweled hand. "Bare hands. Who does that? This isn't the 1800s. Maybe he thinks magic will fix it." Her companions chuckled, pulling out their phones to record, eager to capture his humiliation for their own amusement. The mechanic said nothing. He stayed crouched by the engine, his hands moving with quiet precision. He touched wires, pressed connections, tilted his head as though listening to a language only he could hear. His silence was deliberate, his stillness unnerving. One of the friends leaned forward, calling out, "Hey, do you even know what you're doing? Or are you just pretending for the free show?" Laughter followed again. The mechanic paused, wiped his brow with the back of his hand, and kept working. Not one word left his lips. That silence gnawed at the wealthy woman. She wanted him to react, to flinch, to acknowledge her superiority. But he didn't. So she pressed harder. "Tell me something," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How many cars have you ruined before this one? Do people actually pay you for this?" She waved a dismissive hand toward his stained jumpsuit. "Or do they just feel sorry for you?" Her words sliced through the air. The mechanic's jaw tightened, but his eyes never left the engine. He reached deeper inside, tightening a bolt, adjusting a belt. The onlookers craned their necks, watching every movement. The wealthy woman leaned closer, lowering her voice but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know, people like you should be grateful. Grateful for scraps. Grateful for whatever crumbs fall from the table. Don't think fixing a car makes you important." The crowd murmured, some amused, some uncomfortable. A young neighbor at the back of the group shifted uneasily, whispering, "That's too much." But the wealthy woman's voice drowned everything out. Her pride had found a stage, and she had no intention of stepping down. Still, the mechanic remained unshaken. His hands moved with steady rhythm, the grease staining his skin darker, the heat of the engine pressing against his arms. Every movement was deliberate, precise. He was a man who knew machines like old friends, who understood their language without needing shiny tools or polished equipment. His focus grew sharper, the noise around him fading into the background. But the woman wasn't finished. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" she taunted. "Or are you just too ashamed to admit you don't know what you're doing?" She turned to her friends, laughing loudly. "Watch this. He'll probably break it worse than it already is." A friend chimed in, "Yeah, and then maybe she'll call someone real. Someone with actual tools." More laughter followed. The wealthy woman smirked, satisfied that her cruelty was drawing more fuel. For a moment, the mechanic straightened, lifting his head. His eyes met hers. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something else, something calm, unmovable, unsettling. It was the look of a man who carried storms inside but chose peace instead. A man who didn't need to shout to be heard. The wealthy woman faltered, just for a second, under that gaze. But pride pushed her forward again. "Don't look at me like that," she snapped. "You think silence makes you strong? It just makes you look small. Remember that." He lowered his gaze, returning to the engine, unbothered. His silence spoke louder than her words. And in that silence, the crowd began to shift. What had started as entertainment was beginning to feel like something else. Something uncomfortable. Minutes passed, the sun beating down, sweat soaking through his jumpsuit. The woman sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "We'll be here all day. He doesn't know what he's doing." She reached for her phone, pretending to dial. "Maybe I should call someone real." But just as she pressed the screen, a faint spark flickered inside the engine. The mechanic adjusted another piece, his hands moving swiftly, deliberately. The car coughed, then went quiet again. The crowd gasped. Their laughter faded, curiosity taking its place. The woman froze, her phone halfway to her ear. She lowered it slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Lucky guess," she muttered. But her voice had lost its sharpness, replaced by something else, unease. The mechanic leaned closer again, listening, his hand steady. He pressed a connection, adjusted another, and the engine coughed once more. Louder this time. "Alive!" The sound silenced the crowd completely. The wealthy woman's smirk faltered. Her friends shifted, glancing at one another. No one laughed now. The silence was heavy, tense. For the first time, the wealthy woman felt her confidence slip. But pride is a stubborn thing. And instead of backing down, she raised her chin higher. "Don't think this means anything," she snapped, though her voice wavered. "Anyone can get lucky." But deep down she knew. The man she had mocked, ridiculed, humiliated, he was no fool. He was no beggar chasing scraps. He was something else entirely. And though the crowd stood silent, though the mechanic said nothing, though the car still sat half dead, the power in that driveway had shifted. She just didn't realize it yet. The moment was hanging by a thread. The luxury car sat there, engine coughing in bursts of life, the mechanic's hands still buried inside. The crowd, once entertained, now leaned forward in silence, their smirks gone, their phones slowly lowering. Something had shifted. The wealthy woman, who only moments earlier had been basking in her own cruelty, tightened her grip on her designer bag, her nails tapping against the leather like a nervous drum. She could feel it, the ground beneath her pride beginning to tremble. Then it happened. With one final twist of his wrist, the mechanic adjusted a stubborn belt, pressed down firmly, and turned the ignition. The car roared to life. Not weak, not coughing, but strong, powerful, steady. The sound filled the driveway like thunder. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Heads turned. Mouths dropped open. And for the first time since the mechanic had arrived, the only laughter left was silence. The wealthy woman froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from the purring engine to the calm face of the mechanic. He stood now, wiping his hands on a worn rag, his movements slow, deliberate, dignified. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply let the truth speak for itself. For a long, uncomfortable beat, no one moved. Then, just as the silence thickened, a voice broke through, small, clear, and piercing. "Mom!" Everyone turned. A boy was running down the marble steps of the mansion, his legs wobbling slightly, his gait uneven but determined. His hair blew in the wind, his face lit with recognition. He rushed past the onlookers, past the woman's stunned expression, and stopped in front of the mechanic, staring up at him with wide eyes. "That's him!" the boy cried, pointing. "That's the man who fixed my wheelchair last year." The crowd gasped again, this time louder. All eyes turned back to the mechanic, who now stood like a statue, caught between humility and revelation. The boy's voice rang with innocence, yet carried the weight of truth. He fixed it when it broke. He stayed for hours. He wouldn't even take money. The wealthy woman's face went pale. She staggered back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. Her diamond bracelet clinked softly as her hand trembled. Her laughter, her taunts, her arrogance, they all replayed in her mind, clashing violently against her son's words. She had mocked this man. She had ridiculed him in front of friends, neighbors, strangers. And yet, he was the one who had given her son freedom. The crowd's eyes widened with realization. Their judgment shifted, their whispers turning into hushed shame. A woman in the back murmured, "He fixed her son's chair," while another shook his head slowly, guilt heavy in his eyes. The mechanic remained still, his rag tucked back into his jumpsuit, his gaze soft but steady. He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He didn't need to. The boy's truth was enough. The wealthy woman blinked rapidly, trying to fight the tears that threatened to fall. Her son tugged at her sleeve, his small voice cutting deeper than any rebuke. "Why were you laughing at him, Mom? He's the reason I can walk down these steps." Her chest tightened. Her throat closed. She looked at the mechanic, her vision blurring with tears. This wasn't just about a car. This wasn't just about pride. This was about her child, about gratitude, about humanity. And she had failed all three. The mechanic finally met her gaze. His expression was calm, unreadable, but not cruel. There was no anger in his eyes, no triumph, only a quiet strength that seemed to say, "I didn't need your respect to know my worth." The wealthy woman's friends shuffled awkwardly, their earlier laughter haunting them now. Phones slipped quietly into pockets. Smirks melted into shame. The air felt heavy, like a courtroom where judgment had just been passed, and all were guilty of something. The boy clung to the mechanic's arm, smiling brightly. "You didn't tell me you fix cars too," he said, his voice filled with innocent admiration. The mechanic placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, nodding slightly. Still no words. Still silence. But in that silence was thunder, a storm that had broken the arrogance of an entire crowd. The wealthy woman's eyes brimmed over, a tear slipping down her cheek. She stepped closer, her heels unsteady on the gravel. She stammered, her voice shaking. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." But her excuses felt thin, fragile, powerless against the truth standing before her. The mechanic didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence was a mirror, reflecting her cruelty back to her, forcing her to see herself for what she had been. The boy hugged him again, resting his cheek against the grease-stained jumpsuit. The wealthy woman covered her mouth with her trembling hand, her tears now falling freely. She looked at her son, then at the mechanic, and the weight of her pride collapsed entirely. The shocking reversal was complete. The man mocked for his bare hands was revealed as the very one who had once used those same hands to give a child freedom, dignity, and joy. The woman who had laughed was left standing in the ruins of her pride, tears streaking down her face, the crowd no longer on her side but silently condemning her. And in that moment, the mansion gates no longer looked like triumph. They looked like prison bars. The sound of the engine still echoed in the driveway, steady and alive, but no one cared about the car anymore. All eyes were on the woman who had laughed, mocked, humiliated, now standing with tears streaming down her face. Her jeweled hands trembled as though the weight of her pride had finally become too heavy to carry. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat, strangled by shame. Her son clung to the mechanic's arm, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mom," he said softly, "he's the reason I can walk." "You should thank him." His innocence was like a knife cutting through the layers of pride that had shielded her heart. She took a step forward, her heels unsteady, her breath shallow. "I laughed at the man who gave my son back his freedom," she whispered, her voice trembling. The words hung in the air, fragile but undeniable. She dropped her head, no longer able to meet his gaze. Her tears fell onto the gravel, darkening the ground where her heels had once stamped with arrogance. The mechanic stood tall, silent, his rag still tucked in his pocket, his hands marked with grease and scars. He didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't move to comfort her. He simply stood, steady, unshaken. A man whose dignity no amount of mockery could erase. His silence was louder than any speech. It was mercy. It was judgment. It was truth. The crowd shifted uneasily. Their shame mirrored hers. They had laughed with her, joined her chorus of cruelty, and now they could feel the sting of their own guilt. Some lowered their heads, others turned away. The party atmosphere had vanished, replaced by something raw, human, undeniable. The wealthy woman fell to her knees, no longer caring about the gravel biting into her skin, no longer caring about appearances. Her diamond bracelet clinked as she reached for his hand, her sobs breaking through the stillness. "I was wrong," she said, her voice cracking. "So terribly wrong. I let my pride blind me. I mocked the man who gave my son hope." Her tears dripped onto his hand, but he did not pull away. He allowed her to hold it, her jeweled fingers wrapping around his scarred ones, the contrast striking. Her son watched quietly, his small face filled with both confusion and understanding far beyond his years. The mechanic finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, and low. "Respect is worth more than gold," he said simply. The words were not bitter, not cruel, but firm. They carried weight, pressing into the hearts of everyone standing there. Respect, the very thing she had denied him, was all he had ever asked for. And now, it was the lesson she could never forget. The woman sobbed harder, nodding, clutching his hand tighter. "You're right," she whispered. "I see it now. I see it." Her son wrapped his arms around both of them, his small frame bridging the gulf pride had carved. The mechanic gently pulled his hand free, wiping it again on his rag. He turned back to the car, checked the engine one final time, and closed the hood with a soft click. Then he looked at the boy, his eyes softening. "Take care of your legs," he said, crouching to meet his gaze. "Every step is a gift. Never waste it." The boy nodded solemnly, his eyes wide with admiration. "I won't," he whispered. The mechanic stood again, gave a final nod to the woman, a nod that carried both forgiveness and finality, and began walking away. His boots crunched against the gravel, each step steady, measured, echoing with quiet strength. The crowd parted for him, stepping aside, bowing their heads as though in silent apology. No one laughed now. No one dared. They watched him go, his back straight, his dignity untouched, his presence leaving a weight behind heavier than stone. The wealthy woman rose slowly, wiping her tears, clutching her son's hand. She looked at the neighbors who had laughed with her and saw her own shame reflected in their eyes. She realized then that wealth could not shield her from truth, that diamonds could not buy back respect once lost. She turned to her son, who was still watching the mechanic disappear down the street. "Remember this day," she whispered to him. "Remember him. Never judge a person by what they wear, or by what they carry. Some people carry more in their hands than all the wealth in the world." Her son nodded, squeezing her hand. "I will, Mom. I promise." And so the lesson lingered, not just for her, not just for the boy, but for everyone who had stood at those gates. They had witnessed pride crumble and dignity triumph. They had seen a man mocked for his bare hands reveal the strength that wealth could never match. The mansion gates stood tall and silent, but they no longer looked like symbols of power. They looked like reminders, reminders of how fragile pride is, how quickly it can be broken by truth. The mechanic's footsteps faded into the distance, but his presence remained. The wealthy woman wiped her face one last time, her tears staining her once perfect makeup, her spirit forever changed. That day, she had been humiliated, not by the mechanic, not by the crowd, but by her own cruelty. And yet, in that humiliation came transformation. She had been left in tears, but those tears washed her eyes clean enough to see what she had been blind to all along. The story ends with a truth that needs no mansion, no diamonds, no wealth to shine. Never underestimate those who work with their hands. Never mock the humble, for their strength runs deeper than pride can ever measure. Respect, dignity, humility, these are the true riches. And sometimes, it takes losing everything you thought made you powerful to see the worth in those who never needed power at all.